Good day, and welcome to another edition of Q&A, Social Security Disability Today. I am your host, Attorney Anthony Reeves. I look forward to answering your questions, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's get ready for our very first question. It has to deal with actually a follow-up to one person who asked me a question about what type of impact is the fact that they've gone to college and they actually have gone to, whether it be online or in person, and they're actually doing well in college. In this instance, they're asking, just because they completed their courses and received a 4.0 GPA, will the judge say that they could probably do a light stress job? You know, this is one of the things that I have to kind of remind people, that when you're talking about school, it's not, and this is one of the things I know I probably say throughout, don't focus on the end result. Focus on what happens during the process. And what I mean by that, this is what I mean to say. Somebody says you made a 4.0. Okay, well, that by itself doesn't tell me anything. How did you get that 4.0? Were you taking one class per semester? Were you dropping classes? Did you have special accommodations in those classes? Did you have problems with your assignments? Did you have to take the classes over and over again? Were they online classes where you had the opportunity to be in the school, at home when you were doing your coursework? Did the school offer you special accommodations so that you could turn your assignments in all at one time after the semester was over? Those are the things that Social Security needs to focus on. Did you have the opportunity to do projects with other people? Did you have problems when doing projects with other people? Did you have to do them in person or online? I know I sound like I'm giving a lot of details, but remember, because a lot of times people focus on the end result, I always tell them you got to break down how you got there. Because if you just say I made a 4.0, I can tell you as a former educator myself that I have a certain presumption in my mind of somebody who makes a 4.0. So I'm going to have an opinion. But if I don't know how you got that 4.0, then I'm left to speculate on how you got there. Remember, Social Security doesn't know what's going on in your day-to-day life. It's your responsibility to educate them how you got from point A to point B. All right, let's go ahead and get going to our second question. Second question really talks about, is there such a thing as a permanent disability with Social Security Administration? Let me tell you where this usually comes up a lot. Certain conditions, people automatically assume, and there's a degree of truth to it, they're just not going to get any better. However, Social Security doesn't take that mindset. Social Security's impression is that the idea of disability is that at some point you should get better. Now, is there a possibility that you're going to have a condition that may get worse over time? Absolutely. If you've got cancer and it's out of remission, it's a good chance it's probably going to get worse. But let's kind of keep things in their proper perspective. Let's look at a few things, for instance. Let's say somebody's been diagnosed with cancer. But then, let's say the cancer goes into remission. Are they technically still disabled? Well, I know a few people who have cancer, gone into remission, and went right back to work. So guess what Social Security is going to do? They are going to assume that if you have a condition that may disable you today, they don't assume it's going to disable you forever. That's why there's no such thing as a permanent disability. Now, I had a person ask the question, well, what about an IQ issue? If somebody has a low IQ and they've been determined to have mental retardation, that's not going to get any better. So isn't that a permanent disability? Now, here's where you need to be very careful, because there are certain conditions that if provided with the necessary support and training, you can learn how to function successfully in society with those conditions. I've seen them. There's a lot of different agencies, state, federal, and even private agencies that are assisting individuals with various learning disabilities or mental retardation and assisting them in being able to contribute to society. I stress that point so that you understand one thing. Don't ever assume that just because you've been found disabled and in your mind you believe that it's not going to be something that's ever going to get better. Don't ever assume that Social Security is going to take that same opinion. So it's your responsibility to always follow up with your medical treatment, and remember that Social Security has the responsibility to determine whether or not they think your disability has continued. So in essence, there is no such thing as a permanent disability. And always remember, you bear the responsibility, hooked on phonics. You bear the responsibility of proving that you are disabled. All right. Now we're going on a third question that really deals with the trial work period. For most of you, you're probably aware, because I've talked about this before, that once you've been found disabled, you are permitted to work 9 months within a 5-year period, and those 9 months are not counted against you for purposes of discontinuing your Social Security disability benefits. In other words, except for SSI, which is resource-based, a little different. If you paid into the system, you've got disability insurance benefits, you've been determined to be disabled, and you want to test the market to see whether or not you can work. You can test it. You're given 9 months total over a 5-year period, starting with the first month. You went back to work. Now, is there a cap on the amount of money? To my knowledge, not really. So in this question where they're asking, what if they made $5,000 in 1 month? It's still 1 month. So they're not going to spread it over those 9 months and say, wow, no. If you actually had a job and you made that much money in 1 month, it's still 1 month towards your 9-month work period. Okay, let's go ahead and get going to our fourth question, which is, can I work after I retire with Social Security? This is one of the things that I've told people before, and actually it comes from experience that I have from some of my own family members when I was a lot younger. If you are working and you're retiring, the two are kind of counterproductive, meaning it's kind of difficult to say you're retiring so you want to draw Social Security benefits, but then you're working so you're paying into the system again. Here's what I tell people all the time. If you're thinking about going back to work after you've officially retired and you start drawing benefits, you need to let Social Security know right away so that they can inform you as to the ramifications of you returning to work. The last thing you want to have is a situation where your Social Security retirement is being jeopardized in any way, shape, or form because you've decided to enter back into the workforce. Do that as fast as possible, and more importantly, do it right before you start working so that you won't have any disruption whatsoever. I had a very interesting question, and this is actually question number 5, talking about who oversees Social Security. And as a result, I said, okay, well, what you're really asking is what are the levels of appeal, especially when you've exhausted everything within the Social Security Administration. Now, here's one thing I need you to be aware of. The rules governing various agencies are put forth by Congress and basically put into formats, whether they be federal statutes or federal regulations. Here's one thing that I tell people, and I make this point very clear. There are some things that by statute, there's no level of appeal, meaning once you've exhausted the administrative level, there's really nothing you can do. Now, for purposes of Social Security disability, it's a little different. If you've appealed it all as far as you can, it's what we call exhausting the administrative appeals. That means you've used every appeals within the organization. You then can bring a civil action against the Social Security Administration. What you're doing is you're really bringing it against the commissioner of the Social Security Administration in federal court of the jurisdiction where you are currently residing. So, for instance, if you were living in, Tampa, Florida, you could bring a case after you've exhausted all the remedies in the Middle District, United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida. So at that particular point, if you've gone through as much of the internal procedures and process they have in place and you haven't been able to get a resolution, they typically will let you know at this point you can now exercise your rights by filing a civil action against the agency. So at that point, what you're basically doing is suing the Social Security Administration in order to get a favorable outcome in your case, or at least get another opportunity to have your outcome reviewed internally. So for those of you who are wondering who's responsible for who oversees Social Security, it really depends on what it is you're asking for, whether it's somebody's doing something illegal and you're looking for possibly an internal Inspector General review, whether you're utilizing all the administrative process, whether you're suing Social Security, whether it be as a class action or as an individual. But trust me, there's always levels of appeals available to you if you believe that your rights have not been properly adjudicated. But also remember one thing here, because I had this happen at least one time before. There's always an inroad at some particular point. And sometimes it's kind of wild because, like, for instance, I had a situation where a woman, basically, we appealed her case all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not take the case. And then she turned to me and said, well, what can I do now? I said, other than going to your congressman or your senator, or maybe filing a petition for there to be a change in the way this is happening, I don't think there's much you can do now. So always keep in mind that at some point you're going to exhaust all of your appeals. There's a very good chance that you've done all you possibly could. I hope that answers your question in terms of who oversees Social Security. All right. Time for the final question of the day. Sixth question. I've had this happen a few times before where people ask, why will Social Security only allow me to receive benefits up to a year before the application, and that's it? Here's where this usually comes into play. You've paid into the Social Security system. You've applied for disability benefits. Your onset date is a little bit more remote than your application. So let's say, for instance, you applied in January of 2011, but you said you became disabled back in January 2005. Well, the medical records support that your disability went back that far, but the furthest you can get beforehand is up to a year before. And sometimes people are like, well, what happens to that money? Where does that money go to? I think it doesn't go anywhere, because the reality is that Social Security does that for a reason. Here's where it gets tricky. And this is what I've told people before, is that Social Security is not meant for you to be a lottery type case. And I know some people are like, well, that's money I paid into. Why can't I get money that far back? Well, let's kind of look at it from a rationale standpoint. You indicated you became disabled January of 2005. Why did you wait until January of 2011 to apply? Now, this may sound kind of weird, because I've seen this happen before. But, what'll happen is somebody will apply, and then they'll appeal, and then they'll appeal, and then they'll go back that far. But here's where it gets really weird. Let's say, for instance, that the first time you applied was January 2011, but you indicated your disability began back in January 2005. I don't mean to be rude, but why did you wait that long? And I know this sounds mean, and please don't take it wrong. And I tell people, I say this all the time, you got to take some personal responsibility with regard to some of this information. If you know you're disabled, why are you waiting 6 years before you apply and then expect Social Security to pay you back that far? The other thing is they want to encourage people to, of course, apply within a period of time when they became disabled. Now, it gets interesting because maybe in the scenario I provided you, the person tried to go to work. Maybe they lived on their savings. Maybe they expected their condition to improve. Maybe a host of other things. However, Social Security is not going to compensate you because you chose to take all these other avenues before you decided to apply and then expect them to retroactively go back that far. And trust me, you also have to worry about people abusing the process, because there will be people who will try to extend their disability date back further than that because they want to try to get as much money as possible. Trust me, I've seen it happen. If they thought that they could get more benefits, guess what? Well, then they'll say, well, I didn't become disabled January of 2005. I started having problems in, March of 2003. I should go back that far too. See how this could create a potential windfall? Because all of a sudden now everybody is trying to stretch out their period of disability so they can get as much money as possible. Remember, the onus is upon you. When you're applying for disability, you're not walking in saying, I'm entitled to it, give it to me. You have to demonstrate that you became disabled. And let's be real. If you became disabled at a set period of time and you elected to not file an application until later, unfortunately, that's really to your detriment, but you bear that responsibility. That's one of the reasons why I tell people all the time, if you think you're disabled and you believe you have medical records to support it, file as soon as possible. Don't delay, because the longer you delay, you're only going to be capped up to a year before. And there's no way you can go back before that year in order to get that extra money. So keep those thoughts in the back of your mind. Again, I want to thank you for joining me for another edition of Q&A Social Security Disability Today. As I've always indicated, if you're interested in me conducting a webinar live for any of your groups of individuals, whereby you have the opportunity to ask me as many questions as you want to live, just make sure you send a message to contact@reevesfirm.com. As always, I appreciate you taking the opportunity to reach out. Keep those questions coming, and I'll do the best I can to keep the answers coming. This is Anthony Reeves, attorney at law, and this is your Q&A Social Security Disability Today.